Welcome to Phenomenon Radio, the show that covers thought-provoking breakthroughs in the fields of UAP UFOs to discover fascinating truths, first-hand accounts, and investigative insights into the expanding confluence of physical and mental exposure to this worldwide phenomenon. Hosted by Emmy award-winning investigative journalists, Earthfiles reporter and editor, Linda Moulton Howe, and world-renowned experiencer of the 1980 Rendlesham Bentwaters incident, John Burroughs. And now, leading off tonight's program, here's Linda Moulton Howe.
On December 18, 2013, my Phenomenon Radio co-host John Burroughs had open heart surgery to save his life. He had been deteriorating through that whole year, and his Veterans Administration doctors did not know why. In 2013, John was 53 years old, but he did not have any typical symptoms of heart disease, such as plaque buildup in his arteries. So why were his lungs filling up with fluid in pulmonary edema? On December 1st to the 3rd, 2 weeks before his surgery, I had been invited to fly to Austin, Texas, to meet with John's attorney, Pat Frasconia, physicist and electrical engineer Hal Puthoff, Ph.D., and Christopher Kit Green, Ph.D. and M.D. One of the subjects we talked about was the likelihood that John Burroughs' failing heart was related to his being engulfed twice by the light phenomena in Rendlesham Forest next to RAF Bentwaters Woodbridge on December 26th and 28th, 1980. Why heart damage? Because our government and the UK government over the past 70 years since World War II began to learn that UFOs emit frequencies in the terahertz range of the electromagnetic spectrum. And why is this significant? Because terahertz radiation begins at a wavelength of 1 millimeter, that is less than 1/16th of an inch, and proceeds into shorter and shorter wavelengths known as the sub-millimeter band down into the atomic level. That means that terahertz frequencies can be used to intelligently manipulate atoms within matter, including the bismuth, magnesium, zinc layered metal that I have been trying to understand since 1996, when Art Bell and I received them from an Army sergeant. Further, terahertz radiation is in frequencies that are too high to be measured digitally by electronic counters. That means the generation and modulation of coherent terahertz signals is not possible by conventional electronic devices used to generate radio waves and microwaves. This is why I and scientists that I have worked with on the bismuth, magnesium, zinc layered metal, which allegedly came from a UFO crash in New Mexico in July of 1947. These scientists have never yet been able to build equipment that could generate high enough terahertz frequencies to test the hypothesis that the bismuth, magnesium, zinc nano-layered metal will turn into a lifting body immune to Earth's gravity if we can reach the right terahertz frequency. But the UK Condign report released publicly in 2006 that we've talked so much about on Phenomenon Radio is all about terahertz frequencies from UFOs that can manipulate human minds and damage human bodies. And one of the most sensitive organs in the human body to terahertz is the heart, because it is chambered with empty spaces which will more intensely vibrate from the high-frequency terahertz waves that are so small they can penetrate the atomic level. The truth is that it has been only in the last very few years that there have been enough advancements by science teams such as Franz Kartner at MIT to even make terahertz generators. The bismuth, magnesium, zinc layered metal that I have been studying since 1996 has still never been tested in high terahertz frequencies because no one has had the generator, and no one has been able to build the generator that could produce the frequencies that are estimated to be needed to turn it in to a lifting body immune from gravity. There is another fact about terahertz frequencies that might link to what John Burroughs said in his 1988 hypnosis session with hypnotherapist Al Ward. While John was hypnotized, Ward asked him if he detected any life forms in the Rendlesham forest glowing lights that surrounded John on December 26 and 28, 1980. John Burroughs' reply was, quote, "The light is the life form." Terahertz waves are in a band between microwaves and infrared that range from 0.1 terahertz, that's 100 gigahertz, to 30 terahertz, that's 30,000 gigahertz. That is right between electromagnetic waves and optical wavelengths. That means that terahertz frequencies push up against light waves and can be both radio and optical waves depending upon the frequency. Were those lights that interacted with John Burroughs in Rendlesham Forest operating with terahertz frequencies in the visible optical range? Some scientists have suggested to me that terahertz frequencies are the key ingredient to creating self-activating software at the atomic level of UFO craft and technologies. Are those UFO craft and those technologies also able to travel through wormhole stargates that tunnel through our cosmos, cutting light-year travel down to minutes or hours? That wormhole cosmic travel concept was written about 3 years ago in August 2015 by physicist Eric Davis, PhD, who works for Hal Puthoff, PhD, at his Institute for Advanced Studies in Austin, Texas. The electronic journal was Principium, devoted to technical articles and news from scientists working in space exploration via interstellar travel. Dr. Davis's article was entitled Wormhole Stargates, Tunneling Through the Cosmic Neighborhood. And on page 10, Dr. Davis writes, quote, "Another interesting consequence of the space-time geometry of traversable wormholes is that the space traveler's local proper time through the wormhole can be the same as the local proper time for remote outside static observers, people who are not moving. And that eliminates any undesirable relativistic time dilation effects." Close quote. Eric Davis. Well, the implication is that traversable wormholes can also be used as time machines. And then what if you don't have to even transport human bodies at all through terahertz encoded self-activating machines that can travel through wormhole tunnels? What if advanced space travel is mind uploading or whole brain emulation into quantum computers? That was the theme of the Johnny Depp movie Transcendence, first released in April of 2014. That was science fiction then. But today, the European Union's Human Brain Project, launched in October 2013, runs until 2023. And one of its goals is neurorobotics platform, which can test brain uploading into robots to compare the robot's behavior and thinking abilities to a real human. Believe it or not, 28 years ago on April 3rd to 4th, 1990, in Cleveland, Ohio, NASA held a conference entitled Vision Century 21, Space Travel for the Next Millennium. There was a panel discussion about manned or unmanned interstellar flight. And here is an excerpt from that 1990 transcript. Quote, advanced unmanned craft could include the von Neumann-type machines, which would self-replicate and slowly spread their way from star system to star system, preparing the way for manned flight. And the concept of hybrid-type travel, where a probe is launched to a nearby star system, finds a suitable planet, sets up a receiving antenna, and then a hybrid machine-human consciousness is downloaded from Earth's transmitting antenna to the probes, thus transporting the human species by consciousness, not bodies. After this short break, my co-host John Burroughs will be tonight's guest on Phenomena Radio. He has recently been in email dialogues with Dr. Eric Davis and Drs. Hal Puthoff and Kit Green about many various hypotheses of what is going on between Earth and alien intelligences, from mind uploading to traversable wormholes, terahertz frequencies, alien materials, genetic manipulations, and one speculation that the biggest picture of what alien intelligences are doing with our planet, following certain bloodlines from very ancient timelines to the present and future, in which the alien goal is to transfer specific human minds into alien-made clones, androids, and cyborgs in order to distribute Earth life throughout the cosmos.
You're listening to Phenomenon Radio Live, exclusively on KGRAradio.com, with Bitwater's experiencer John Burroughs and Emmy award-winning investigative journalist and Earthfiles reporter and editor Linda Moulton Howe. Tonight's interview, very special interview with John Burroughs, will begin right after these messages. Ladies and gentlemen, to Phenomenon Radio Live, exclusively on KGRAradio.com. For tonight's interview with John Burroughs, here's Linda Moulton Howe. Linda?
John, we have been talking in a couple of hours at a time over the last couple of weeks about your trying to understand yourself, understand what happened in Rendlesham, and that paragraph that we have shared on Phenomena Radio over the past 3 or 4 years is becoming even more and more relevant, both to your search and to understanding maybe what happened not only then in 1980, but the fact that there are technologies now that are getting ready to take off that might end up taking us to the stars for exactly the reason that scientists in the black world first were able to study terahertz and some of the alien materials. And now maybe a bridge is leading us into the white world, where all of us are going to start hearing about what amazing transports that we may have in our solar system and the Milky Way galaxy and beyond, and that it's no longer science fiction. And that takes me to Annex F4. And this is in what we have called the Condign Report, or the technology, science and technology investigation of what the UK government called unidentified aerial phenomena, or UFOs, that was once classified UK eyes only when it was presented to the Minister of Defense in 2000. Later, in 2006, for reasons unknown, it was quietly unclassified. And eventually the information in this report came to you and your Veterans Affairs doctors through Hal Puthoff and Kit Green. And here is one of the key paragraphs. Quote, The well-reported Rendlesham Forest Bentwaters event is an example where it might be postulated that several observers were probably exposed to UAP radiation for longer than normal UAP sighting periods, implying that there were all kinds of observational evidence and data about the exposure of humans to UAP terahertz, and you would be one of those people they are referring to. It is clear that the recipients of these effects are not aware of their behavior perception of what they are observing is being modified in the presence of this energy. The E-field strengths, which are known to affect the brain, are of the order 50 multivolts per centimeter at between 1 and 100 megahertz, and experiments have shown that effects can be produced at levels of 10 to the 7th to 10 to the 8th volts per centimeter. We now know today that what this Condign report and the scientists were studying is what we have called terahertz frequencies. And terahertz is now being focused on in advanced research by physicists relating to all kinds of either technology for propulsion or other areas having to do with how to make subatomically manipulated materials that might then neutralize gravity and turn into lifting bodies. And given this as the background, can you take us and the Phenomenon Radio audience back now to what your own memory is, starting with December 26, 1980, of what you encountered?
Love to, Linda. Before I do, one of the things that you did bring up was that they released it, and it's an unknown reason. We just had a guest on a couple of weeks ago by the name of David Clark, and that was the reason. David Clark had uncovered some other stuff in FOIA request, and he actually found a mention of a report that he did FOIA on, and he was the one responsible for forcing the MOD's hand as far as releasing that report.
You mean releasing the Condign report because of pressure?
Yes. Right, and it was his pressure and what he was doing. And yes, you're right. They did just do this unceremoniously. They just released it. Now, kind of like what they just did with the last 15 of the 18 files that we caught them in a lie with. They made a big deal about the other stuff, and we're like going like, here it is, folks, there's nothing to see. But then some of this other stuff they quietly released and tried to keep under the radar.
And we know a lot of this has to do with terahertz frequencies and those lights that you encountered. And because of that, and because this is so relevant past what happened, but present and future of trying to understand the UAP UFO technology, can you take us back in your own mind's eye to what you saw and experienced?
Well, sure. And to lead up to that, though, it's like, I think, and you were, like you said, you in the intro, you were down in Austin, and they exposed you some documents right before my surgery that you went public with, actually on Whitley's show, and then you put it on Earthfiles, and then you did the night of my surgery, I believe, you did a Coast to Coast report. But the thing is that prior to me taking a look at that report, and I'm not sure when you first learned about terahertz per se, but terahertz as of 12 was very quiet. There was very little said about it, and it definitely had nothing to do with propulsions systems and stuff like that. So it was the breakthrough.
In fact, John, it was before then. It went back after 9/11 when we finally started putting the screenings in the airports, that those are terahertz screeners. But at the time leading up to 2012, none of us knew that the terahertz frequencies that were involved with screening post 9/11 were going to become this huge factor as research kept evolving in Rendlesham Forest.
No doubt, and it's very clear to me now, and I'll explain my experience. But at the time when I saw that paragraph in the Condign report, it blew me away, and it was like, well, this is a game changer. But I had no idea how much of a game changer it is. And it's not just a game changer that led to some reports being circulated, some stuff going to the VA, helped me get care. But the fact is that this is what Hal Puthoff and some of these physicists and Kit Green are trying to expose to everybody now. This has been a slow release since, and really, Linda, if you think about it, they broke the story to you, because when they took you to Austin and they sat you and Pat down and they went over this stuff, they were educating you on how much terahertz plays in what they're about to do.
Right. And they saved your life by communicating to the Veterans Affairs.
Yes, Kit Green. I mean, obviously Al Puthoff was in it too, but Kit Green was the one that was doing that. And I think we'll read a little piece. You'll read a little piece here pretty quickly on what he said on Above Top Secret about all that. But, okay, we'll get to what happened to me. And the reason why I set this up is because I'll give you a brief summary, because at the time it made no sense. This was 1980, okay? It was the Cold War had been going on, but it didn't really ramp up until Reagan really made it a huge issue. But there were all kinds of Cold War issues going on since Vietnam, really. And there was all kinds of technology being worked on. And one of the things that was going on was just outside our gate. It's amazing now how much declassified documents have pointed to what they were working on, EM technology, and not androids, I'm sorry, but drones, lasers, and everything else right outside our gate at all those facilities. But when I came on duty that night, and we went out on the first night, we chased something that, you know, as in Peniston's statement even said, and the people that were listening on the radio said, we had trouble getting to it. At one point, Peniston said in his statement that we went past it and came back. What I remember simply was this. We kept seeing it in the woods, and when I got close to it the first night, it was like there it was, and it was like a bright light, and then it dimmed, then it got bright and disappeared. Now, Peniston has described a whole different story, and even Ika Bansack talked a little bit more about it when he did do a couple of interviews for James Fox. But I basically have no memory or anything else what happened when I got close to it. I mean, it was like it was there, and then it was gone. And then you had Ed and Jim remembering other things. Now, what I remember is Jim was the closest to it. And I say I remember is because, as you say in this content report, it can affect what you can remember. And there's always been a question brought up about we were interrogated and they put false memories in us, you know, and that's why we don't remember, or this whole story is the way it is because of what they did to us afterwards. Or is it really we just struggle with what we encountered and what we saw, or is it both? But the first night it was pretty simple. Got close to it, it was up and gone. Okay? Now, Peniston said he touched it, walked around it, saw glyphs, and then as the years went by, then he talked about, well, actually touching it then, having a binary download and everything else. And that was night one. Now, when I went back there on night 3, I went forward with Adrian Bustinza. And what the audience needs to know, and it's finally come out, Halt's, it's like dragging, it's like, it was unbelievable to get him to go this far. But it took this long, because originally when the story first broke and he was involved in it, he denied Adrian and I were even there. Then we were there, but I wasn't involved. But he's now admitted Adrian and I went forward. And what happened on that night was I went forward. Okay, I saw something coming down. Halt asked me if that's what I saw before. I said I didn't know for sure. Asked to get closer to it. He said, go ahead, and he sent Adrian with me. And as we started going towards it, it appeared to come towards us. So I started running. We both did. I took off running. He ran to get closer to this. And as I was running, he went down to the ground. And then it was like I felt like I got close to it. And then the next thing I know, I'm standing there in the field. It's gone. I'm looking back at Adrian, and I'm looking back at Adrian, and then it's like, what happened? Now, Adrian's come forward now and said what he saw happen to me, and Halt's finally admitted now that we did go forward, okay?
And it's important, John, here to let everybody know that you and I have talked with Adrian eye to eye, and he said that as he saw the light coming down around you, he said the light pushed me to the ground, and I saw you surrounded by the orange light, John.
Right, and Adrian even said his hand went into the light, and he's had issues health-wise too. But the thing is that has been one of the biggest mysteries, not so much that it happened, but the fact is that Haltz wanted to cover this up.
Right.
So it was like from the very beginning, and what I mean by not as it happened and then boom right afterwards, but from the beginning when the story was being controlled coming out, that was wanting to be kept out of it. So what did Haltz see, because he was behind us, and what did they really know at the time, and then never mind the fact now that OSI, a couple guys have come forward that were there and involved in it, and the one guy said that, we were put under hypnosis to try to figure out what we saw and what we remembered. So, look, to get to the gist of the beginning is something very strange happened to us over 3 nights. There's been incidents before that and after, but we had a very strange encounter. And one of the things that two things that led me down the road, besides my hypnosis, we can go into later. But I always felt from the beginning it was something we were doing that triggered something else. And my hypnosis kind of reinforced it. But Andrew Pike was there working on a I want to be careful now because he's jumped up and down and screaming hard. It wasn't a government-sanctioned project. He was there working on a funded project, and he was looking at a phenomenon that was in the area, okay, that was known to be there. It was funded for him to investigate it.
And
that phenomenon.
John, just to be clear, that there was something related to this phenomena that was in the Rendlesham Forest area before 1980.
Yes, that was part of what it was. Matter of fact, if you read his book, he said that he was there investigating the phenomenon when then the incident happened, and they both kind of intertwined and got stuck with each other. And he goes into the frequencies and different things and talks about what the phenomenon could be and what it involves. So he has a book out on that. And then you find all these declassified documents about what we were working on and studying, in the area. And then the third thing, which is coming more to light now, was Cobra Mist was there. Now, it was shut down, but a couple of things stand out. In 76, they shut it down, but the reason why they shut it down was some kind of inland interference, which what wasn't ruled out was it was an interference like a phenomenon or something. It could have been Russian interference too, but it also could have been that phenomenon, which I believe probably is what it was because of why would they have a study going down there looking at this phenomenon. And what was interesting was that this SRI team that we've talked about before came in.
The Stanford Research Institute scientists came to study Cobra Mist, the problems with it.
Right, and they didn't leave. They stayed. They closed the facility down, but the team stayed, and they started working out of Martlesham Heath and the base itself. So what were they there for?
So they must have found that there was something that today in 2018, whistleblowers in SEALs and Delta forces are talking to me and to others about the fact that we are in like a 2-story planet. We live on the surface as Homo sapiens sapien, that there are alien intelligences that have been here for thousands, millions of years, and they occupy below the surface. And that may be what they discovered.
It may be, or it may be a little bit more what I think we were going to talk about tonight, in that we were going to go into the fact that we're looking at creating, because you look at Davis's speech that he gave at this conference you talk about, you look at what NASA was talking about, and there's more than that. Symposium was in 90, and the reason why that's important is because in 1990 they were talking about this stuff, okay? And they've really had quite a few more since then. And I think the farthest I could find was 2015. And so if people want to start to get an understanding of what's going on, and let's just say where are we going technology-wise? And then you have to question, where did this technology or these ideas come from and everything else? You have to start following the best of the best, which is our scientists. Now, if these scientists are willing to consider the fact that, okay, we could possibly send consciousness, our own consciousness, out into the cosmos and occupy other, whether you want to say, planets or whatever, and that would put a flag down for mankind. And part of what Davis said was, I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, Linda, because I want to kind of, I've read so many documents in the last 10 days and asked so many questions. But he was implying this would be done through, wormholes, right?
Right.
So if they're looking at the wormhole concept, okay, and we've seen some papers that were written recently that they've created wormholes or the black hole in laboratories now. So they understand that this could possibly be done. We just may not have the equipment yet right there to completely accomplish this, that we're working on this. But if they can create these effects, okay, what does that mean? I mean, for one of the things was, early on, they needed high power sources and stuff. Sage radar was used for some of this. It was used to do other effects. There's documents out there to show this. So if they're working they're talking about this in 90, right? This was open now, because these documents were never classified. The 1990 documents weren't classified. They were NASA, people talking about this. They were working on this. So
yeah. And John, one of the sentences you highlighted that would be important to share right now, this is from that 1990 NASA technical report in conjunction with the gathering of the scientists to discuss the whole issue of interstellar travel. That's what it was about in 1990. And one of them says, with regard to machine civilization, one might observe that the transformation between biological civilization and machine civilization is not a distinct one. It is a gradual process, and it's a process that has already started. We use automobiles for our legs, and we use tractors for our arms, and in fact, considering the impact we are having on the biosphere, biologically, it may be the machine civilizations and biological are not compatible. And it may be the most natural place for a machine civilization to live is out in space, where it is not interfering or destroying a pristine, delicately balanced biological environment. And that leads to your discussion with Edgar Mitchell. When you ask him, was the phenomena that he was in Rendlesham, was it condign? Can you explain that discussion you had with Edgar Mitchell?
Sure, but before I go to that, I think what people need to understand something, and that little piece that you just read, they're pushing to go out into space. I didn't understand why. Why would we want to go to Mars? Why would we go to these planets that aren't habitable right now? Is part of the reason is they're not going to try to make it habitable totally for humans, or are they going to set up mine up there and do different things up there and take the stress off of planet Earth and go from there? Now, this was 1990. Okay, this isn't like now where all of a sudden climate change is a big deal and all this other stuff. So they were looking at doing some of this. Now you've got Musk and everybody else talking about that. So are they really wanting to start full-blown colonies and move people from Earth up there? Or are they looking at ways, because they know the stress on our ecosystem is so bad, that they're going to do a lot of this, say, on the moon and on Mars and then maybe a different planet that may or may not have life on it at one point anyway. So they may not be able to do everything with humans, but they can, like you said, robotics, human consciousness, and everything else.
That's right.
Okay.
And when you talked with Edgar Mitchell, because it's key, you're talking about advanced technology, but you're talking about the transfer of consciousness from here on Earth into containers elsewhere in the universe as perhaps the way actual interstellar travel will take place. So what happened with Edgar Mitchell?
Well, I got to talk to him, I think it was about a year and a half before he died. And I'm really interested because people have to understand that this To the Stars thing didn't start just with To the Stars or the Bass Report. It goes back all the way to NIDS, okay? And all the stuff they were working on and looking at. And Edgar left the planet, saw stuff differently out of our shield, our EM field, coming back, and he did some tests. But what I wanted to know was, because he'd done a bunch of work on this, I asked him. I said, point blank, I said, are you familiar with Condyne? And he said, yes. Were you one of the astronauts that's mentioned in Condyne that was involved in this? And he wouldn't answer me. But I did say then a follow-up question. I said, is the phenomenon in Condyne what we dealt with at Rendlesham? He said, yes. I said, is the phenomenon that's in Condyne and was at Rendlesham what the majority of what we're dealing with, period? Is that what most of this UAP stuff is? And he said, yes. And he wouldn't expand on it with me any further, but he did say that was it. Now, at the time, it did make a lot of sense. And I still don't understand this. So I'm not trying to come off as an expert or a scientist. But what this is starting to look like, if you start to look at what they're working on and everything else, is if we're thinking about it and we're going to try to do it, wouldn't an intelligence somewhere else out there, and especially if it's more advanced, wouldn't they have already possibly mastered it? And that may be some of what we're dealing with. And what the phenomenon is itself that we're seeing, and it's using wormholes, you know.
And John, one of the aspects of the human abduction syndrome, which we can't leave out because it's affected at least 3 to 5 million people on planet Earth, according to some surveys. And that is how many people have had the experience, as they say, I'm dealing with, and they will describe usually some kind of a pear-shaped headed gray being. And they say, the abductee, they are taking out my mind. They are taking everything. And then the abductee stops talking under hypnosis. What is that process? How is an advanced civilization removing the consciousness from a human organic brain to do what with? Where was it taken? And it's always some part or a duplication of it is returned to the human with added information in every case that I have ever been involved in investigating. And for the most part, those who can remember what was added in their own mind, it always is something along these lines. There are more dimensions than we understand. The whole cosmos is layered and is complex, and there are other dimensions. Right.
And I mean, again, I've never, that isn't what happened to me, as far as, that type of experience. But I guess where I'm trying to go with this is simply, okay, if we're going to try to do it, or maybe we already have done it, because remember now, we've sent a lot of probes out. We have one that went completely out out of, it's the one that, Contact Sagan was involved with. They sent it out. It's out of the Milky Way now, okay? All right? So, and what they discussed was sending a consciousness through a wormhole. And if I'm getting this partly wrong, I apologize, folks, but I'm trying to make sense of it too. But let's say we've already sent probes out there. Let's say we already understand some of this. Are we already sending messages out ourselves, conscious messages to these probes? And what are really in them? No one knows. They just make an announcement. We've sent a probe into space, right? Okay. Now, one of the things that caught my attention, and I know, or actually I shouldn't say I know, did you get a chance to read thoroughly what Davis talked about when he spoke at that conference?
The wormhole stargates tunneling through the cosmic neighborhood.
Right. Yeah. But remember how he said that Sagan's contact wasn't so much science fiction as everybody thought it was?
He says Sagan, here I'll read it. At the request of Carl Sagan, it was Thorne and collaborators did this idea of stargates for an academic exercise and in the form of problems for a physics final exam at the request of astronomer Carl Sagan from Cornell, who had then completed the draft of his novel Contact. Sagan wanted to follow the genre of what I call science faction, whereby the story's plot would rely on real physics concepts to make it more realistic and technically plausible. This exercise ended up becoming one of the greatest cottage industries in general relativity physics, the study of traversable wormholes and time machines.
And see, he talks about time machines.
Yeah, exactly, which is the implication of all of this paper and the work about being able to tunnel through space-time and not be 10,000 years off when he was talking about local versus the transversing time. And he says in this article that was August 2015, Wormhole Stargates Tunneling Through the Cosmic Neighborhood by Eric W. Davis, and he is PhD, a senior research physicist at the Institute for Advanced Studies at Austin in Austin, Texas, that is owned and operated by physicist and electrical engineer Hal Puthoff. And Dr. Davis continues and says, quote, "Real stargates exist in principle. They are merely a form of what are called traversable wormholes, and they are one type of what would be faster than light propulsion. Faster than light propulsion, emphasize that." So this was his paper in 2015 that today is beginning to look like the fabric of the universe around us for real.
No doubt, and he, you know, he's involved in this, and you have NASA talking about it. You have to look at this from an interesting standpoint that he also wrote a paper now that the bubble's not as important as it appeared to be, as far as using Abercrombie. If I don't say it right, you can correct me. Drive.
Alcubierre.
Alcubierre drive. Okay, but if you research that, it is a faction of time travel. Mm-hmm. So when you look at wormholes being created, okay, then what exactly are we dealing with? Now, you go back to Hal Puthoff, and this is one of the things that intrigued me about the man. The man's a physicist, okay? He studies everything. He looks at every book, every document, every material. When I was down there visiting him, his office is just, it's unbelievable how many books he has and different things. So he looks at all these theories. But you had a physicist leave that field to go into Project Stargate. And he ran Stargate. Why would you ask a physicist to run a psychic division? That's what it was. It was a Cold War thing that was going on.
Remotely.
Right, but what I'm trying to get at is the Russians, Intel had showed the Russians were doing some of this, and it was a concern, okay? And they took a physicist to run the program. Now, a lot of people don't know that, but that's a pretty big deal to me, number one, because he's looking at consciousness itself and psychic powers and how you can do this. So here you have a physicist working in a program that does remote viewing, which they call Stargate. Interesting, huh? Stargate, you know, the whole wormhole thing.
Right.
And then you have the fact that they're looking at being able to remote view things. Now, another thing that's in these declassified documents is they also call it remote influence. It's there, and they were working on it. Well, remote influence is partially, wouldn't that be transforming consciousness out somewhere else to control things?
Well, I understand the question, and we need people who are able to provide us proof. But my own sense of things is that consciousness, as Edgar Mitchell said, that he had that moment of epiphany coming back from the moon to Earth, that every single particle in this cosmos was connected.
No doubt. And I mean, that's even deeper. But I'm just trying to wrap my arms around that everybody's now going down the consciousness wave, and yet it NASA themselves believes it's possible, and you have these physicists now talking about it is possible to transform consciousness across the cosmos, and then be able to use it to control occupying another planet.
Right.
That's with machines, But there was another part that I didn't get to read.
And it could be happening on Earth right now.
That's what I wanted to go to next. But they also talked about they were going to do, and I didn't get this totally, but it was in there, and this is in sci-fi. They were somehow going to be able to take the consciousness and store it, and clone human bodies to use that consciousness.
Yes.
So they were implying that they didn't want a body born with consciousness, particular body. They wanted a container, which would not necessarily be a robot, but a human container that would be born on that planet. They could transport it and then implant the consciousness they wanted to further what they wanted to do.
And in my book, my third book, Glimpses of Other Realities, Volume 2, High Strangeness, is about 100-page chapter about rapid cycle cloning in tube technology that half a dozen people in the abduction syndrome in the early 90s, they drew and sketched for me, and that I have had people who have worked for DIA and CIA seek me out because of those 100 pages. And what is the bottom line? Each of those human abductees experienced the process of having their life essence transferred from their Earth human body into a clone that was either the same age or younger, because the non-humans were saying it is vital that your entity, and every abductee understands the word entity to mean their soul life force. It is vital that your entity remain in your human container for X period of time. And that is why we are allowing you to die in the form that you are because of disease or whatever it is that each one is told. And then you are being sustained in a body that will go on for a period of time as if there is a human crop aspect to all of this, and that the soul and the experience in the body, the very specific bloodline container, is the key to what the non-human intelligence is looking for in the soul entities.
Right, and if you want to kind of take that concept in a dumbed-down version, watch the movie Heaven Can Wait, I think it is, where Warren Beatty was not supposed to die. They implied that God decides when you're going to die, and he wasn't supposed to die, so they took his consciousness and then they put it in another body. Okay, now, I mean, all of this is like super duper sci-fi, but what you got to think about is this is all being discussed, and this is being discussed by scientists. Now, the one thing To the Stars has done is at least this much has gone forward as what they call part of their business plan, is you have more and more people coming out and talking about this, number one. But just like me, I know there's other people out there that are starting to look at things, and do research. And, it's a lot easier than going to the library and, and stuff now, but you can start finding these papers.
Right.
And you can start finding this stuff, and you start realizing who's talking about this. This isn't somebody sitting behind a computer trying to write a blog about conspiracies.
No.
These are people in science that are talking about all this stuff. And it's eye-opening. And so then you have to go, and I know we're probably doing a break in about 4 or 5 minutes because we can get back into some of this, how it could be reversed after the break because of the studies that Gary Nolan and Kit Green are working on, and tied some of this into this. But you look at these papers, you look at the scientists that are talking on it, they're getting funding from somewhere to work on this and look at it. And where are they coming up with these ideas? And one of the things that always stood out to me was I know Pilkington, I think his name was. He did a book called Mirage Man, and I know he ruffled some feathers. But when he finished, as he was finishing, he met up with Green. And I think, and I don't want to quote it because I haven't read the book in a long time, but I think it was more than just Green. It was some other people that worked with Green. It may have been Howe. And he said up until he got to these guys, he didn't really look at UFOs as being seriously looked at them. But after he met them and got their presentation, he took it on a whole different way. And one of the things Green said in his book, he said, he hypothesized, well, let's say they make it look really bad, like, you know, aliens are coming to eat us, they're going to crash and do all this crazy stuff, done all these crazy things in these movies, and people get all worked up about it. And then later on they come back and go, no, it's not so bad, it's really only this. But even this is going to take a complete re-education of people, because people are still stuck in driving around in cars. They're not even thinking about a lot of this stuff, or actually Star Trek is, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, beaming up in lights and being able to neutralize gravity, all of which the phenomena does, which is what To the Stars is making clear in the release of the videos. Right,
and you have the fact that the transporting stuff, they're looking at it at net assessment, and DARPA, they're working on it. They're working on telepathy, where soldiers can talk to each other without using communication channels. Okay, this is not conspiracy stuff. This is real. These are documents out there and articles that the military themselves are talking about. So if they're working on all this, where is this all coming from? What? And you have some of the main people in this that are studying the brain, DNA, and everything else. What do they know? What are these scientists, where are they gleaning this information from? I don't think they sat down and watched Star Trek and said, oh, that's what we're going to do. There's physics behind this, and quantum physics and everything else that's opening up a whole new world.
And it has been in the black world for 70 years evolving. And what we need is to have a bridge to get it into the white world, where civilian scientists can catch up, that all of the pressure of the repression and building a concocted planet that should not, they said, ever know about any of this, it's beginning to crumble and break. A revolution is around us, John. And when we come back after this break, one question let's start off with is what Robert Bigelow told 60 Minutes. The aliens are right under our nose, and what you think that means.
You're listening to Phenomenon Radio Live, and this 50-minute uninterrupted segment of Phenomenon Radio has been brought to you by OnlineVibes.com, your personal connection to mind, body, and spirit, and they're committed to connecting all of you with healing modalities that can manifest a true and healthy change in your life. Visit the website at OnlineVibes.com. That's online, VIBEZ.com. Hour 2 of tonight's special interview with John Burroughs will begin right after these messages. Stay with us. Welcome back, everyone, to Phenomenon Radio Live. What a very, very in-depth and compelling interview that Linda is conducting with her cohort in crime here at Phenomenon Radio, John Burroughs. Before we can begin hour 2 of this amazing interview with John and Linda, it's time for the news, and it is brought to you every week right here on Phenomenon Radio by Earthfiles.com. Linda?
Thanks, Race. Today, on August 9th, 2018, Vice President Mike Pence was at the Pentagon to propose, quote, an idea whose time has come. And that idea is a sixth branch of the U.S. military that will be called the Space Force, echoing President Trump's call for a Space Force 6 months ago in March. Defense Secretary James Mattis this week announced that he supported the idea of a space-focused military command, but he's not certain the creation of a new branch of service will work. Currently in the United States, the Air Force manages what is called Space Command. In his Pentagon speech, Vice President Pence said, quote, the time has come to write the next great chapter in the history of our armed forces, to prepare for the next battlefield, where America's best and bravest will be called to deter and defeat a new generation of threats to our people, to our nation, close quote. Pence asked Congress to allocate $8 billion more for space security systems for the next 5 years. But Pence did not say that in order for any sixth branch of U.S. military to be created, the proposal has to be approved by Congress. A Space Force cannot simply be brought into being because President Trump wants one. Today, on August 9th, in addition to Vice President Pence's speech at the Pentagon, the Department of Defense handed a report to Congress entitled Final Report on Organizational and Management Structure for the National Security Space Components of the Department of Defense. Now, what is fueling the administration's push for a Space Force? Well, the DoD's report to Congress states this, quote, potential adversaries now actively developing ways to deny our use of space in a crisis are around us. It is imperative that the United States adapts its policies, doctrine, and capabilities to protect our space interests, close quote. Those potential space adversaries could be Russia and China if they shot down American satellites. For example, there would be tremendous destabilization of the United States if our global positioning system were destroyed, or military, civilian, and spy satellites were attacked. There is also the much hinted and controversial rumor from military whistleblowers that there are alien intelligences in outer space that are hostile, and humans need to be able to defend Earth from them. Does the DoD know that? And is it hiding that behind this controversy over a Space Force? This is Linda Moulton Howe. Please stay tuned to Earthfiles News updates on KGRA Radio and visit every day my science, environment, and real X-Files news website, Earthfiles.com, for more on breaking stories about our universe, this solar system, and the planet we live on.
And that's the news brought to you by Earthfiles.com. Now back to the interview with John Burroughs. Linda?
Thanks, Race. And John, before the break, I brought up that very interesting quote by Robert Bigelow on 60 Minutes a year ago when he said, aliens are right under our noses. What do you think he meant?
Well, okay, if we can't go into that unless we look at what Robert Bigelow has been doing for the last few years. And besides NIDS, and then he got the funding through Harry Reid to go deeper into this, which goes back to the Stars Now and some of the people that are in it. And Alessandro worked, inside the department that they've now openly admitted exists. And now there's been, I feel...
Let's say what that department is. I have gotten this absolutely confirmed from Luis Elizondo. The real name of the Department of Defense office that was highlighted by the New York Times, Politico, and the Washington Post on December 16, 2017. Here is the exact name that Luis Elizondo used and operated for 5 years in the Pentagon. Advanced Aerospace, not aviation, Aerospace Threat Identification Program. And he says it was a clerical error, the aviation.
Okay. Now, so we go back to Bigelow. He worked on this. He had the Skinwalker rants he brought. He was looking at a lot of different things. He brings in, Eric Davis, Hal Puthoff, Kit Green, John Alexander, all these guys that are tied back to the Cold War, Stargate. What do the Russians have? What are they working on? If you look at Green's background, he's worked with people in China. I didn't see anywhere where he did work with anybody in Russia, but other scientists have, done collaboration with scientists over there to look at some of this stuff. And one of the things that Skinwalker was possibly like a vortex, a wormhole, but they were also looking at, effects like consciousness, okay? So you have Bigelow come out early before he does the 60 Minute and does an interview with George Knapp, and he says confirmation is what we need first, not disclosure. He says we come out and we admit they're here, and we stop because we don't want to go into all the details. And you can look at some of the different peoples in power, even the older Bush. When you look at his son, he freaked out when he was asked that question. He said he would never talk about it, but you look at what he said. He said just recently, he said, people can't deal with the truth, okay? They don't understand. Well, you come back and if Bigelow, the way he said it was, you can imply that maybe they're not here in the type of form or way we think we would be, as far as, biological, physically. But maybe they are at the energy force, the conscious level, and they're coming back and forth. I mean, you have Kit Green and Davis looking at that. That was exposed in the Annie Jacobson book, that these guys are working on this, okay? So he's saying they're here, they're among us, but no one's asked him that I'm aware of, or at least publicly, what do they look like?
Okay, but
how are they getting here?
We have to insert another part that is big. It's been described to me since 1983 by a variety of different people in military and intel and whistleblowers, and that is this: that at least some of the non-human intelligences that come from someplace else, either in our universe or other dimensions or even other timelines, they know how to camouflage themselves in human bodies. And that comes back to the rapid cycle cloning technology that I was describing in that big chapter in my book. If there is a rapid cycle cloning technology and that there are advanced civilizations that they understand that they can't just be on a planet with life forms that don't recognize them or would be afraid of them, but if they camouflage themselves in exactly the body containers of any given planet's life form, then they can do whatever they want and not be recognized. And that is supposed to be a part of what our environment on Earth is. Non-humans camouflaged in human bodies. That would also be an explanation for Robert Bigelow's words. They are right under our noses.
Yeah, but ultimately, Linda, what you're saying is like a computer virus, okay? I can take a virus and put it in a computer, can control it. So technically, they're not human. It's just they're inserting their consciousness into another body and controlling it. Which, I mean, let's just say, I'm not trying to say that's the real deal, but why are they doing a study looking at DNA and they call it the antenna? They're saying that they feel, well, they never totally explained it, even in Jacobson's book, or maybe, I haven't read that area for a while. It's been a while, I think about a year and a half since her book's been out. But what do they know that makes them believe that people are walking around with the potential antenna, which is basically the pineal gland, or pineal gland, that's what they're studying, that this phenomenon is supposedly, may be interacting. And they never made it clear totally either whether that it is the person here and, like just has some DNA in them that makes this phenomenon attract to them, or is this phenomenon actually coming here and infecting people and altering them to alter, mankind themselves? What say you on that?
And there is this third facet that has been out there since I did A Strange Harvest on animal mutilations. The pineal gland. If you put your finger right in the center of your forehead and go back through the skull just a little bit into the brain, that's where the pineal gland is. That is why the Indian various spiritual groups do red circles or black circles there. It is their acknowledgement of this pineal gland, which when it is examined under microscope, the pineal gland contains exactly the same cells as in your retina of your eye. And it has always been the question, why would the pineal gland inside the front of the brain have retinal cells that we associate with being able to see in the light spectrum? And this whole question then that has been posed over the decades since I did Strange Harvest, here was the question that was presented to me a long time ago. Is it possible that the pineal gland was genetically created and part of the manipulation of evolving Homo sapiens sapien, specifically so that non-humans would have the ability to interact with telepathy, images, and symbols in the minds of evolving humans?
Right, which is what you're basically saying is that if what NASA was talking about is possible for us to do, they could be coming here and infecting human beings, and it could be for a broad scope of reasons. And the most craziest thing about this is if we think we can create, and this is a great question, we're going to have some guests on to talk about some of this, if we can create these wormholes and we can create this drive, okay, or even if it can't be done at the scope of a large, like what people think as a starship, what if they're not looking at a starship concept right away? They're just looking at trying to get something through a wormhole like consciousness itself. If we're looking at this, we're having our scientists work on this. And one of the things that we talked about before the break about getting white scientists to come forward, do you remember Project Green Glow? I forget, who's the guy that we had on?
Yes, Evans.
Yes. Evans wouldn't answer a lot of questions because he was working on classified material. Most of these scientists, the brightest, are working both ways. They're in the black world. They're getting exposed to this. They're working in different divisions that are narrow-minded, compartmentalized divisions, but then they talk and they start to put stuff together, okay? And I think is some of the white world isn't involved. I'm not saying they all are. And you've got some of the younger kids coming out that are just getting their PhDs and stuff that are starting to write papers and do research on this. But the older guys, they've been in both ways, and, as far as white and black, and they know a lot of this stuff. And where did they learn it from, number one? But then two, they're working on this stuff. So they wouldn't be spending this kind of money and bringing these people in if there wasn't something to it. And then you got to look at the fact that, they're restricted by what they can do. And we probably have reached a point remember what Bigelow said? He said this to Knapp, they're eventually going to be seen to the point where they can't hide it anymore.
Right.
So I don't know if he was implying that there is going to be a point where these wormholes maybe they're blocking them. Maybe we're trying to block them. I'm not really sure.
Yes.
This leaves open to interpretation. But if he's implying that eventually we're not going to be able to hide this anymore, as far as what's coming and going, and if this is how it's possibly taking place, well, first of all, I don't think our government would. Nick Pope used to love to say this all the time. They don't really want to admit they can't defend us, right? And if this is something that's not a spaceship per se that they can track on radar coming in, and they could shoot it down. You know what I'm saying? And this is a different way they're doing this, whatever this phenomenon is. Then that would be really hard for people to understand and accept, I believe.
Well, there are two things here. Remember when we had the controlled remote viewer, Lynn Buchanan, on Phenomena Radio with us a couple of years ago. And Lynn was a remote viewer in Project Stargate. And it was managed by the Defense Intelligence Agency. It was linked to the work that Hal Puthoff has done in remote viewing. And Lynn said that each of the remote viewers in Project Stargate at the end of the 80s were tasked with, they don't know that that's what their task is till later, but each one had tasks that had to do with, is there other life in the universe? And Lynn told us that every remote viewer saw that the quote-unquote universe was teeming with life. And then he said this very, very important provocative sentence. We have allies. And if we did not have the allies, we might be overrun by non-human intelligences out there that are hostile and would like to see humanity eradicated on Earth without fully understanding why that is the case. Other whistleblowers have said the same thing, who have had military assignments on this planet and have come face to face with non-humans and have talked to me and to others about their understanding that there are hostiles and allies, and the allies so far have the upper hand, and we are alive and well because of those allies. Now, when you take Lynn Buchanan's controlled remote viewing and you say the Space Force today, the Space Force is like the natural extension of what else Lynn told us in that interview. He said that one of his bosses at the Defense Intelligence Agency in the late 1980s time period was assigned to manage interstellar trade routes in an office in the Pentagon because we have had EBANs, the gray ones, like what we back engineered and created technologies on the planet. They liked and they wanted to trade out in their Milky Way and beyond trade routes. So there are many facets here that give me some confidence to say to people, there may be hostiles and everything may not be rosy, but that we have a lot of allies. And if we've got interstellar trade routes that McKinnon in the UK stumbled into in 2000, then it's been going on for a long time. And that means even if Earth has been kept dumb and blind about interstellar trade routes, they are alive and well. And that may be why we are now in a government that is trying rapidly to stop being an all-black underground space project and bring it into the open and start pulling together so that we catch up to what they already have out in the Milky Way.
Well, you could say that. I'm not disagreeing with it, but you could also go back to some other documents, and we've covered Iron Mountain, Von Braun, you know what his secretary said he said. You have these think tanks that have talked about, like right before 9/11, we needed another Pearl Harbor, and then 9/11 hit. And what the gist of it is that since the Council of Nicaea, they wanted to find a way to manipulate and control mankind, right? And they've gotten good at it. And one of the things that was said, and these different people, a lot of different people have said this, different people that were involved. I think even we've talked about some of your whistleblowers. The last thing, we've had the Cold War, then we had terrorism, and the last thing that they're going to do, which will change mankind forever, because 9/11 had changed a lot of things for us, including our freedoms. It's being taken away. Right. And now they're going to try to crack down on the internet even more. They're going to try to take a lot of that away. That's coming. And the more I read about this whole Trump thing and this Russian thing, this goes back to McCarthyism. And the Russians are coming. We can't trust them. We have to we have to control everything, and they're trying to now take everything away so we can't have these interactions and stuff. It's coming, folks. I mean, I don't know how deep or far they're going to get away with this, but they're going to use this, and they're going to use the Russians as their threat, just like they did in McCarthyism.
And then come UFOs and ETs.
Yeah, then come UFOs and ETs. But it would be a threat from above coming down to unite planet Earth against the threat. So you've had leaders even like Bush. He got run out of office, and it's ironic because he talked about a new world order and everybody got up in arms. And today, that's all everybody wants. No borders, no rules, no laws, no anything. We're just all kumbaya getting along. But here's the problem. There's no way that's going to ever happen. Not in my lifetime. Maybe 100 years from now or something, because there's too much hostility. And so all I'm getting at is, but a threat from above and a space force, because some of the things that researchers are doing now, they're seeing this is going to be militarized. Space is going to become militarized. So whatever our plans are, whether we're planning on going out to Mars, not really to build a colony out there of people, but of robots, and you do mining and industrial stuff to save planet Earth, okay? Or whatever else is going on.
Yeah, we need metals, and we need various things that are probably on that planet, and we'll have transports coming from Mars to Earth.
No, we won't even need to do that. We'll build it all up there. So that's going to take the pressure off the ecosystem, as far as that's what they said in 1990. I mean, people go, well, wow, why would they do that? Well, if planet Earth is falling apart, which it is, and the weather's changing, and we cannot, what did it say? That we can't exist with the mechanical stuff. We need to maintain where we live. Well, that would be the push, wouldn't it? To get out there, find the minerals we need, do the manufacturing up there. Sure, people are going to be dumb enough to go up there, and I don't mean it in a bad way. I don't really see why people would want to leave here and go into space, especially the environment they're going to see. But they'll get people to go up there, and they can start doing all this stuff, and and take some heat off of planet Earth. That may be part of what's going on. But the thing, that alone was eye-opening to me, because now it makes sense maybe why the push to outer space is really coming. Because it doesn't make any sense. Why leave Earth to go to Mars, which is twice as bad or 50 times worse than Earth, go up there and do all this? What? Because we're going to make it habitable? Come on, what way? What technology do we have? But it does make sense if we're going to go up there and do some stuff. Oh, and guess what that falls under? Bigelow's hotels.
Right. Because
I'm sorry, go ahead.
He has the only contract with NASA to build those blow-up buildings on Mars. He's the only one who has the contract.
But yeah, and he can also put them in space at first, too.
Right.
And they can traverse back and forth, okay? So some of that makes sense. But the thing that's eye-opening to me, and I don't understand it totally myself yet, and I'm digging, and there is a lot of good stuff out there, is being able to transport consciousness the way they want to do it. And if we can do that, imagine if something else, intelligence could do that, and they were doing it to us now. And I mean, I think that goes a little bit into the whole thing with antennas and stuff. Were you going to read a little clip that Green said on the Above Top Secret, or are we going to go over that? Go over that.
This is what Kit Green, Christopher Green, PhD and MD, said about you. Quote, "The decision that was made to grant medical disability to John was just. Some of his records will remain classified. Those of us in military and intelligence medicine can be proud the right decision was finally, if belatedly, made, meaning for you. We should remain both vigilant and ashamed that our profession remains improperly darkened, and we should be trying to bring it to the light when we can." And he means you struggled to just get the Veterans Administration to acknowledge that you had been in England in Bentwaters, let alone they had denied that you had been there, and that was hassling your getting your veterans benefits when you needed heart surgery.
No, correct. And then you want to lead the other little part where he talked about the damage that happened to me?
And here we go. Non-ionizing electromagnetic radiation caused the injuries. The radio frequency is identified in a dozen classified and a half dozen unclassified studies on cardiological and neurological injuries. And ladies and gentlemen, we are talking about terahertz frequencies emitted from unidentified aerial phenomena, also known as UFOs. That is what he's talking about. And then he says, the radio frequency is identified in a dozen of these reports, but not thousands of reports. Very, very few physicians even care about this arcane area of research, and fewer know about the injuries sustained by near field, and these are these specific frequencies, to humans. The data is sparse. It is not properly peer-reviewed. It is not understood. It is not the subject of current research, and that is the truth.
Which here, and that's a valid point that he made, but what did he say up at the top? That a dozen classified reports. Okay, so what he's saying is that there are a lot of reports and studies on this. Now, you go back to this, one of these reports they were talking about where they've created this effect in the lab now, where they can do, it's not a wormhole, but the black hole itself. And they can keep it from collapsing, right? Something going into it. And what they're talking about in this is it's the Hawking radiation. Well, Hawking radiation is terahertz.
Yeah.
So the actual black hole is terahertz based.
And when it comes to this issue of the interaction of frequencies on tissue and minds, this is where we get into the importance of the study of DNA. And you have talked with Gary Nolan at Stanford. If I understand, and you could explain this to the audience, one of the most significant pieces of information has to do with what they have learned about junk DNA and how it relates to you and all people who have had interactions with this light and terahertz.
Well, I think you can expand on it because you've done more research, but what I can tell you is that they're looking partially at the junk DNA, which they've never been able to do until recently. And now this would be like 5 years ago that this was going on. 5 years was going back when I first met Gary Nolan in a hotel in Flagstaff in the lobby with Kelleher. But they're looking at the junk DNA, and one of the things that they're talking about is there could be something hidden in the junk DNA. Now, I think you can expand on that further, Linda, better than I can based on that understanding.
Yeah, what I now, and I just set your mind on fire, is that junk DNA could be an archive of every single thing that has happened to DNA in the lifetime of a conscious body. That they can go into the junk DNA and they could find out if you had chicken pox at age 6, if you encountered terahertz light at age 18, that there is actually a chronological, orderly archive from beginning of birth all the way to death in the DNA that we have called junk DNA. And also, would this relate to advanced consciousness interacting with Rendlesham and all of you at Bentwaters? Did they seek you out specifically for the only 2 encounters because your DNA, your son's DNA, might be of a unique bloodline or archive that they're looking for?
Well, I mean, that's one way to look at it. And when you talk about this, here's the thing. You have to look at the fact that the Hopi themselves say that there's hidden secrets in the junk DNA. They believe that. The elders believe that. So there's a secret of man itself, and maybe how we evolved, where we came from, and everything else in it. But I was talking to somebody I've been working with doing some research, and he brought up this very interesting proposition. He said he used it based on the lines of contact, but if you're having an interaction, say with an energy, because in my hypnosis, that's what I said it was. The life form was the energy, right? The blue light. Okay. If you're having an interaction with this, and there's whatever it is, it's just like if you can study a jet fighter or something, when they take them, they get them, or whatever, they try to break them down. Each side does. They try to figure out the new technology and everything. But if I had an interaction with, say, this particular phenomenon, which is maybe consciousness or whatever, the propulsion system, whatever, could they not glean the blueprint to be able to do that themselves through people? Because it's not just me they're looking at. They're looking at, and this is where this is why it was strange with me at first, but now it makes a little more sense, was mine was in 1980. But they claim that there's been a lot of incidents happen in the last few years. It's been expanding and accelerating. So they've had a lot of younger people in special forces and stuff have interactions with this. So what they're doing is they're trying to look at their DNA, and they're doing this study. Now, if there's a blueprint to help them do this, wouldn't they want to know?
Exactly. And so studying DNA, RNA in people who are in the human abduction syndrome would be a priority our government would have. But it goes to the heart of this disconnect between the black space program of the 70 years and the white world, in which all things related to ETs and UFOs have been denied. And if you deny, then it is very difficult to get people in the human abduction syndrome to come forward to work with anybody medically about their DNA.
Yeah, but they're already doing it, okay? And most people don't understand this, and I'm sorry to have to say this, but all these ancestry and all these other things that they're doing, these DNA samples that are being sent in, I believe I just read somewhere where a government agency or a big contract company was buying out the biggest one, I forget what it was, a pharmaceutical company or something, was buying out this particular, study group, like Ancestor DNA. Well, they're getting a database, right, and they're studying the DNA across the board. And I know people will say they can't do that. They can do whatever they want as long as they get away with it. And so this is all being stored on computers. This is all being analyzed and stored on computers, and they can hack into this stuff, knowingly or unknowingly. If the company's allowing it or not, it's another story, but they can get the access to all this stuff. Heck, it was very strange at the time, but when this all came about, when they wanted my DNA, the VA sent out a survey to several thousand individuals that, retired veterans and stuff. They wanted to do a DNA survey analysis. So, and I got one of the letters. And so all I'm getting at is they're analyzing the DNA, and they're looking at all this. And it's so, and we just now in the last, I don't know how long it's been public, but it's just the last 20 years where they've been able to really do this. And they're building quite a database on all this. And they're looking at all possibilities. So when people say no, yeah, they can. And they made it really cheap, which I thought was interesting too.
Yeah, and there have been headlines just recently, synthetic telepathy. Humans are going to connect minds to robots to attend their own funerals by 2050. All of these are new stories that are coming about how there will be the ability to transfer consciousness, which is made and interacting with the DNA in any given container body, that we will be able to transfer the consciousness of everything that is in the DNA of that body before that body dies, and even transfer it into an android made to represent us going forward as our frail human body dies. our consciousness will go forward in an android or even a cyborg, which will be stronger, can live maybe for hundreds of years. And suddenly, we are looking into a future where immortality can be purchased.
Well, yeah, and what you just brought up is interesting. Okay, let's say, they did this, what was that program where they froze bodies, and they were going to keep the body frozen, and they cut the head off, but the idea was that when they finally figured out how to cure the disease in the body, they would bring the body back to life, right?
Right.
But the problem is, why would that matter if the consciousness is gone? You can bring a body back to life, I guess the heart back, but is that going to bring the consciousness back? You know what I mean? How are they saving the human consciousness?
Yeah.
Just because the brain's still there and frozen doesn't mean you just thaw it out and the consciousness reactivates. Do you know what I mean?
Which is why mind uploading is a big subject. Elon Musk has started a brand new company a year ago called Neural. I think it's Neural Lace is what he's manufacturing. And the whole Elon Musk approach is that we will have the ability to open up the cranium, the top cranium bone, put in this neural lace that will go down onto the nano level of the brain. It will be connected to a computer that will then be able to do the frequencies that will bring the cells and the mitochondria up to health. And that this neural lace will become the miracle of regeneration and eliminating disease.
Right, but I mean, there's two things with this. Okay, number one, the body deteriorates. Okay, period. You age, so they're going to have to find a way to stop the aging process, and they're also going to the mind itself. And so that's interesting. Or do you just harvest the consciousness and put it in a new body? This may be healthier because they're looking at eliminating disease where they can clone. They're doing cloning right now. And that was interesting. This guy that just died, Charles Kronheimer, just died. He was a political analyst, but he, one night on Brent, I forget it, he does the 5 o'clock Eastern show on Brett Hume, okay? I think it is, whatever. They did it at the end, what's the most alarming thing? And he says the ability, they're cloning sheep and they're doing all this stuff. He said that's going to change everything. And he didn't go any deeper, and they were kind of like, whoa. But the bottom line is if you can create a body, if you study the DNA, you create a body that eventually is that's free of disease, and you can take the consciousness out of a diseased body and put it into the body and the brain and keep that from being diseased. That's maybe what they're looking at. And if they're studying that, then they could also look at sending consciousness out into space.
And now is the time to read once more from the 1990 NASA Symposium on Interstellar Flight. Here it is. The concept of hybrid-type travel, where a probe is launched to a nearby star system, finds a suitable planet, sets up a receiving antenna, and then a hybrid machine-human consciousness is downloaded from Earth's transmitting antenna to the probe on the distant planet, thus transporting the human species by consciousness into body containers.
I know, that was stunning. And here's the thing. You've got to be able to, take the consciousness and contain it to keep it alive. And what do they say about karma? Well, people come back and have memories of past lives. Well, okay, but they don't have full memories that this is true. But imagine if they could take the consciousness and keep it. So if you then put it in the body, all that knowledge isn't lost, and you can go forward with it.
Yeah, exactly.
And here's another scary proposition. But Linda, here's another scary proposition. Now, they have said it appears this could be forward. Okay, you go forward in time in this, right? What if you figure out how to go backwards, and you can take consciousness from today and implant it in somebody 100 years ago?
then you'd have Da Vinci, you would have Tesla, you would have major geniuses of history.
But here's the strange thing, and I'm not trying to say that's what took place, but, well, yeah, I mean, you said it, but they always say these guys, they went into, like, some kind of different level. They went to a different conscious level, right? They were tired, they meditated, whatever, right? But in fact, if you learn how to transmit that back, whatever, it doesn't mean time travel like we think we see on TV, but if you can learn to send it back through a wormhole, you could alter everything, the present.
Yes, and what all of this new technology is implying is we have been thinking about the difficulties of putting humans in a rocket ship to go to Mars, when in fact the reality of even what advanced civilizations in the universe could be doing is all transportation is going in and out of dimensions and transporting consciousness into bodies, which would explain the emphasis on DNA and genetic harvesting that have always been a focus of other intelligences on planet Earth, going back to the Anunnaki and the Sumerians.
Right. And, you know, I mean, this is like, a lot of people are going to say, this ain't possible, or why are they talking about this? Well, I would have been the same person 5-10 years ago. I really would have, even with my experience, okay? If I hadn't had my experience, I wouldn't probably be listening to this at all, and it's no offense to anybody. I just would be trying to get on my everyday life, and unless it was a hobby of mine, which a lot of people are starting to do, you know, until that's maybe changed a little bit now because of that New York Times article, and actually did make some mainstream TV. And so for one day we had a break from whether Donald Trump is this or this is that and everything else. And we actually did have some news stories about the future of where we could be going, right? So that was kind of, that was nice. It was right around Christmas time. It was nice, you know, and it got the minds off of this inner political fighting that goes on in a daily business. Meanwhile, the earth is falling apart around us, and what I mean is the environment's changing. It's climate change, which, I mean, it could be. I mean, there could be other factors other than us. We've influenced it, but there could be a lot of other factors. And the scientists would know. They'd be studying this. So all I'm getting at is, for once they maybe they're trying to get people to start thinking about this from a different way. So I myself only have started to really take this more seriously and look at it more seriously because of my experience and because of the different hints that have been dropped by different people in science, the military, and everything else, and starting to look at documents. And a lot of this stuff, yeah, it was classified at one point, and it's been declassified, just like the whole Stargate program was partially declassified, and in it, they even admitted they remote viewed Rendlesham. Why would they remote view Rendlesham? You know what I mean? Why were they interested in what a UFO UAP is? You know? And was it just simply, are they real? Or what are they, and how can we learn more from them? Condyne itself said UAPs need to be studied for weaponization.
And sadly, that weaponization may be what the conscious intelligence that interacts with our planet does not want Homo sapiens sapien to use. That would go to the tension that has been since the early 1960s in our Minuteman missile areas, where it is very clear that glowing lights, huge 300-foot diameter craft, have interfered with our Minuteman missiles. And as Robert Salas told me long ago, Linda, it became very clear that whatever they are, whatever is in it, whatever guides them, whatever they are doing, they do not want humans to do anything with atomic bombs, hydrogen bombs, or nuclear missiles. And he and others have also been exposed to something that I've heard from whistleblowers, that what humanity did not understand in World War II was that when you explode an atomic bomb, you are thrusting into other dimensions that we do not understand. And
yeah, you could be screwing up a wormhole. You could be screwing up the frequencies themselves, modifying them, so they necessarily can't travel the way back and forth, however they're doing it. Yeah.
And literally causing destruction in dimensions that we're not aware of. And this is, to me, one of the keys. I've talked with Jacques Vallée about this much, and he wrote a book called Dimensions, that we are a matter universe surrounded by what is called the astral plane, the nearest dimension. There may be a lot in that astral plane that we still don't understand, and our government is truly trying to block portals in order to keep out negative energies. That is one of the themes. But there's another one that's even bigger, and that is that an MIT physicist has told me this. He said, we know that there are intelligences that can be at one end of this universe, the matter universe we're in, and they know how to go out of this matter universe into another specific dimension to do a cushion shot back into the matter universe, and that they can travel 3 billion light years in 5 minutes by going out of the matter world into another dimension and coming back from that dimension into this one. That it's not science fiction, that this is truly the cosmic physics of traveling in our universe, but we humans have been denied.
But that would be simply this, okay? That would be simply creating a wormhole or a black hole, or knowing where a black hole is going to be, or going to an area where there's a black hole, and and then zapping it and creating it to stabilize it or whatever, which was all sci-fi 20 years ago. Heck, even that one movie Interstellar that they came out with, kind of that's how they did it, right? Okay. Right. But if you think about this for a minute, okay, you've got the black world science working on all this. Okay. And if in fact everybody believes you have to physically go, but if it's just mental, if they can do it mental, but then they could come down with that energy and transform it, whether it's an animal, a human, depending on where you're going in a different area, there may be a different type of physical intelligence, biological intelligence that we could do. But if you look at all that, that's very, very wild. That's very hard to deal with. But if they could do that, that would explain how Bigelow says they're among us. That would explain the study of Skinwalker, why a physicist was looking at Stargate and the psychic powers of the mind and what they can do and can't do. A lot of that starts to make sense. Why are they studying human beings that... And here's the thing, and I'm not... And I've said this, I think, last Sunday on a show I did with a guy, with Frank, that there's no disrespect to civilians, okay? And what they may or may not have happened and what they report. But the military is different. Like with Rendlesham, they knew it took place. They had people there pretty quick. And they were looking at this and they knew what to look at. Then they have access to us medically, our records, and they could follow us and everything else, right? Whereas a civilian could say they saw something, but they don't really know exactly what it was other than to send a team in to look at it. But military, they can track. And they know when this stuff's taking place and what's going on. And another interesting thing...
John, just to insert, so the audience is tracking with us. It's frequencies. We have frequencies. I've talked with people who have worked in radar, and they said there are specific frequencies that when they come up, they say, oh, this is a craft that is operated by Ebens. This is a craft that is operated by blondes. This is a craft that is operated by reptilians. That there are Hertz frequencies that have been identified with very specific craft that are related to various different types of non-humans that our government has been operating with for 3-4 decades.
Well, that part I can't argue about, but what I have no idea because I haven't gotten that deep into that end of it. But what I do know is if you go back and trace a lot of these incidents, especially the military ones, they're around radars and systems in our own technology, okay? And a lot of them never see the light of day, but there has been some very interesting cases where they have, and Bentwaters is one of them. And if you go back, and we were in a foreign country, but all this technology and stuff was being studied, worked on. SDI was being worked on right outside the gate at that moment. Lasers, EM frequencies, everything else, the radar systems they had. Montauk's another one that like people get crazy about, but a lot of the same equipment at Montauk was outside the gate at Bentwaters Woodbridge, okay? And the thing is here's my take on some of this. I think they plant the alien story out there on this stuff for a reason, and they do this partly to keep people from digging deeper. Now, does that mean it doesn't evolve any of that? No, but once you hear that, it's a taboo not to look at it, and it allows them, this is what our guest Chuck DeCarlo said on more than one occasion, to run stuff and do things under the radar, because as soon as the UFO stuff comes out, or aliens or whatever comes out, no one's going to really take a look at the area, what they're working on, what they're doing, and the technology behind it. Now, in that case, To the Stars is starting to open that up. But the deal is, that's why I was so fascinated by what they came out with and what Puthoff's looking at. He's looking at gleaming this technology and this terahertz technology to take us out to the stars. Well, he's got to know something about why we could take it and harness it and do it, and you've worked with them now with some materials that you have, or you're working with them. Right. He's got to know something about the fact that somebody else must be doing it. And maybe it's taken place. It's like what Bigelow said, they're here now among us.
And if they are, it's which ones with which agendas, and Lynn Buchanan would say it's allies. And then my reporter kicks in and says, if we know that there are allies and they have a different form, but they can camouflage themselves as humans and have done this for thousands of years on this planet, then how do we introduce humanity to the real intelligences?
Well, that is a problem. And here's the thing. Here's a question that's not been answered, Linda, even when we've talked about it tonight. Are some of us different? Or are we all really the same wherever we came from? And what I mean by that, I'm not trying to offend the Christians, but I'm just saying that we were created, okay, but are we all pretty much the same, as far as biologically? And then these things come in and infect us, if that's what's going on, and change us, or modify our genetics to change us and make us evolve. You see what I'm getting at?
Or John,
yes.
if I may, I beg your pardon, both of you, but really quickly before the end of the show, there's honestly think there's no way, and I'm glad that you said it, that you could offend folks with a religious faith, because it very well may be true that in Genesis and the fruit of the tree of knowledge, if we partake in it, that very well may be what you're talking about.
That we were genetically manipulated by intelligences. And the interesting part of this whole huge story in the 21st century is that in the Garden of Eden, as described in those old ancient texts, the teacher was a reptile.
Yes.
And in the 21st century, we have retired Navy people who have deceased, who have said that one of the huge civilizations in the Milky Way galaxy that is both a problem and maybe some are actually allies are reptilian. Is it that we, as we are moving to the end of, we'll call it, of just earthbound consciousness, that by 2020, this planet is truly going to have newscasts coming from Mars if Elon Musk gets there. We will know that we are now dependent upon materials that are going to be being harvested in Mars and the moon. It will be the revolution, no matter whether we're introduced to non-humans or not. And suddenly, to look back at the lens of the Garden of Eden and know that that was a true story, it's just that Homo sapiens sapien did not understand that it was the reptile in the garden that was trying to teach, and it had manipulated DNA in already evolved.
Right. And can I add something from my hypnosis?
And you had to be a willing participant.
Well, yeah, but can I add something from my hypnosis that makes a little sense with all this? Okay. it said we're here observing to see if you can evolve like us, okay? But then it also said they'll be back for me, okay? So are they studying us just like we're studying whatever this is? And if you think about it, at the end, Enoch was removed from the Bible, basically. And that you don't talk about that. They don't want you to read it. They don't want you to talk about it, all right? But if you think about it, okay, if you don't need rockets and ships, as many as we think we do, just think about how much more inexpensive it would be, never mind all the other ramifications, to be able to harvest a bunch of consciousness and send it out into space.
Yeah, but wasn't it Constantine, you guys, that removed Enoch from the Bible as we know it now?
And they did it because he referred to evil in the second heaven. And when they had the Council of Nicaea, the Hebrew patriarch said there cannot be any evil in heaven. Therefore, Enoch, you're out. That was what happened.
And I just want to make note of this real quick, because I don't very often just jump into your show like this, you guys. But I learned these theories from watching Linda's video on her YouTube channel, and I just would like to drive everybody listening on the live show here tonight and in the podcast later to be sure and check out Linda's very thought-provoking YouTube channel. It is absolutely loaded to the neck with very, very, very thought-provoking work and very well-researched and in-depth work, and it's time well spent.
Thank you so much. Every Wednesday night. I love it. The channel is growing, and I welcome everybody who comes to Phenomena Radio. We cross-pollinate each other, and that's what we should be doing in this world. Thank you.
And as we close tonight, Ray, I'll tell you, take us the next week, but the next few weeks, and we're working on this hard behind the scenes, actually working with mainstream scientists to bring them on to do a better job of explaining it than we have. We're just trying to introduce you to start thinking about it from a different concept. Maybe take a break from politics for a while and start thinking about the future of mankind and what's going to happen to us and where we're going. Because the science world's doing it, people, and I guarantee you one day you're going to wake up and go, what just happened?
Amen.
Oh, absolutely. Well, thank you to the both of you. We're going to go ahead and wrap tonight, but absolutely stay tuned to Phenomenon Radio every Thursday night from 8 to 10 Eastern right here on KGRA. Linda and John both are working very, very hard to get the commitment of mainstream scientists to come on and talk about this phenomena is very, very big, and it's not being done anywhere else as far as I know at the level that they're doing it. So you definitely don't want to miss it. For John Burroughs, for Linda Moulton Howe, I'm Ray Hobbs, the producer of this phenomenal program. Very honored to be the producer of this program. I want to thank every last one of you for listening and for all of your support. And don't go anywhere, because tonight Jimmy Church is actually off. He's at ECETI at a big event, and he didn't have any content to replay. So I'm going to go back and I'm going to replay a very, very thought-provoking interview with Winston Keach. He's actually been on the program a couple of times with Linda and John, but this last interview was very, very compelling. So we're going to replay that one for you tonight. So don't go anywhere. That's coming right up. That's Phenomenon Live and a Phenomenon Refeed back-to-back. You can't beat that, folks. Thanks for listening. Have a great night and have a great weekend, everybody.